Hi, I'm Anumani, and I'm the author of Unmasking Your Soul, a transformational journey of truth, light, and healing in your modern day shaman. And today I have two amazing special guests, Jessica Santonato and Rhea Ann. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Joining us from Canada, and it's snowing a little over there, is that right?
It is nice and cold up here.
Spring's around the corner, but it's still definitely cold.
I always say summer's coming.
I'm looking forward to spring. So before we get started on the questions, I'm going to read your bios. So I'm going to start with Jessica. Jessica is based out of Toronto, Canada, and she's the co-founder and managing partner of Syndicate International, a global social enterprise that delivers powerful leadership development programs to those who've overcome adversity and who are now ready to make a positive impact in the world. She's currently one of three people chosen by an American company to develop a large group of entrepreneurs from Canada, the US, Mexico, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand in their communication skills and overall effectiveness. A graduate of Landmark Worldwide's team management and leadership program, Jessica has also been mentored by James McNeil, one of the world's top sales closers and a close associate of renowned motivational speaker Les Brown. And Jessica's going to tell you more about her story and how she got to where she is today. So I'm going to move on to Rhea's because they have amazing bios and you'll get to hear more about them as we get into the questions. And so Rhea's expertise and professional coaching background comes from over 15 plus years in corporate leadership development prior to transitioning into her own practice. In 2017, Rhea was hand selected to be the first female peak performance coach to join Your Life Limitless, a breakthrough coaching platform based out of San Diego, California, coaching clients on the X10 accelerator system engineered by Nicholas Elliott. As the founder of her own coaching program, Reconnects, Rhea's element is taking a holistic approach when serving leaders who operate from a state of mental and emotional chaos and help them reconnect to living a life of clarity while serving powerfully. And to date, she's worked with well over 500 plus clients. So I am so excited and honored to have you ladies on Unmasking Your Soul Conversations. And I always like to start with the question for the audience to hear your answers about what is your definition of soul or your experience of soul. And Jessica, maybe we can start with you. So you can tell people how you experience soul.
Sure. So soul for me is the core essence of who I am, and it's the eternal part of me. It's not going to go anywhere, when I transition from this physical plane. And it's the core, like I said, the core essence, the nucleus of everything. And I almost think of it as like, in the movies when they have this machine and there's like the core piece that everything runs through, that all the communication runs through it, and then everything is executed from there. That's what I think of soul. But when I think of soul, I think of that. And it's really like a guidance system. It's our higher self. It's our true self. And just an authentic way of connecting with like who we are. That's how I would describe soul.
Beautiful. Thank you. I love that. And Rhea, how do you experience soul?
Well, I guess for me, it's echoing a lot of what Jess has already mentioned. But I guess to sum it up in one word, it's truth. It's truth for me. It's Jess mentioned, it's, the essence of who we are, our very core being. And it's, what really allows us to get very clear about our North Star, our GPS, about, that guidance system when things get confusing. So yeah, just to sum it up, it's truth.
Beautiful. I love that. And obviously your souls had something to do with you coming together and forming the Syndicate International Group, which is
most definitely.
And you're going to have an opportunity to talk more about that. Can you talk how you guys met and what caused you to decide to create this group that's doing some amazing work?
So we actually met at my then fiance, Michael. He was having a birthday party, and this was a few years ago. And so Rhea was actually a friend of his before her and I met. So she showed up there, and it's not like we were in touch for, right after that. It actually took a while, and we saw each other here and there in different events, and saw her more and more at one of the events that I was holding. And then afterwards, just things started to connect from there. But yeah, essentially that's how we met.
Yeah. And it was really cultivating that experience and cultivating that friendship before we really got clear about being in alignment of working together.
That's wonderful. And I believe everything happens for a reason, right? And you were talking about, both of you spoke about the truth and the essence. The soul represents our essence. And I believe that, that it is our GPS. I agree with everything you guys were saying, that it brings the opportunities to us, the people that we're meant to work with. And obviously you guys were brought together to bring this to the world. So let's start with like your individual stories, because you both have amazing stories and things that you've done throughout your career to get to this place now. So Jessica, can you start with your journey of unmasking? You weren't always where you are now. You went through a lot of different experiences. So can you tell our audience about your journey of unmasking and what you did to become more authentic, and talk about maybe some of the masks that you were wearing before you began to surrender to your soul and your essence and what you were really here to do.
Sure. It's so funny because when someone asks, can you tell me a little bit about your story? Or I'm like, well, where do you want me to start? So much. But you know what? I recognized that I was putting on a mask. I started to recognize the masks in my life from a very early age. So I can't pinpoint, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I felt like I was this free child just exploring and, doing what children do. And then I remember being told things like, okay, so that if I was to identify the mask, it would be that I don't matter. That was the mask that I was wearing for a long time. And when I was younger, I would hear things like, oh, she's so quiet. Oh, she's so shy. And I remember thinking, are they talking about me? And I remember hearing it more and more and feeling like, because I was hearing that from the outside world, I would shut Jessica down. And I didn't want to be that curious kid anymore and expressive kid. I just wanted to hide because people labeled me as shy. And so I lived into that, right? And as we know, when you're labeled something, it's very easy to live into that story. And so I felt like that's when I turned off the taps, if you want to say. I stopped the flow of who I essentially was and living my truth, even though I was a young child. And what's funny is I watched some of your interview with Susan DeSenzi, and she was talking about when she was younger, how she would have these experiences, and people thought she was like weird or like she couldn't do this. She couldn't say she was psychic or whatever you might call it because of fear of what other people would say. And people were asking her about relationship advice at 9 years old. And so no one asked me for relationship advice, but it was interesting because that stood out to me when I heard it, because I was reminded of when I was younger, I would have these experiences of, deja vu or predicting things. And I remember being at school and I would get this overwhelmed with anxiety, and like my palms would start sweating and everything because I knew what was going to happen next. Or like I've seen this and I was a child and I didn't know what to do with all this information. And so essentially me like putting that mask on was shutting off everything of who I really was. And so going into my later life and, I met people who were involved in gangs, in street gangs here in Canada. And I married someone that was involved with that life. And it became an abusive relationship, an abusive marriage. To the point where one night he severely beat me. And I thought I was going to lose my life that night. But when I look back, being in that relationship, of course, it was so easy for me to fall into that because I believed the story that I didn't matter all those years prior. So when he insulted me or called me names, whatever it may have been, in my mind, I was thinking, well, of course, I'm too stupid to do this. Like, yeah, I don't know anything. And I would actually hit my head against the wall, out of punishment, or I would, scrape my arms, or I had tried to kill myself. And so it wasn't until, the final night, the final attack, that my ex-husband had did, that I was laying on the sofa and I had three thoughts. One, that my children would find my body here. Two, that my parents would find my body here. Two, that my children wouldn't have their mother. And three, this isn't fair. I didn't get to do everything I wanted to do. And that was my catalyst. And maybe I needed that to almost have like my back pushed against the wall to actually say, I do matter. And there's something bigger out there for me to do in this lifetime. Because despite me going through years of being the shy kid or being in the relationship with my husband, feeling like, yeah, I'm stupid, there was still a part of me that said, you were meant to be here for something bigger. But at the time, I just didn't know how to get out of it. I just didn't know. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have people to help support me get out of my situation. And so I just kept myself locked in this prison, because that's how it related to it. And so I always told myself, I'm never going to be free until he dies. And he died just a few years ago, actually. And but going back to the sofa, when I was laying down on the sofa and he was choking me unconscious, the three thoughts that I had, that was my moment where I was like, you know what, it's time to do something. What's going to make me happy? And I started reclaiming the truth of who I was again.
Yeah, and some of what you talk about resonate with me. I also was a shy kid and labeled as a shy kid. And I remember telling a cousin of mine, because I would have out-of-body experiences, that I had this out-of-body experience, and he said, you're crazy. And I remember that in that moment, I chose to shut all that off and really disconnect myself from that world until I had my dream of awakening. And I think that, a lot of people experience that, right? The people around them, especially children, you don't know any better, right? You believe what others tell you and you live that story. And we'll get more into, because I want to hear some things that you did to get out of that and also ask Rhea. But that's a really important point for people to be aware of if they have children. How can you help your children not live in that world, because they're so impressionable, especially at the younger ages, and even as they grow into teenagers, right? But I think when you turn like 6 or 7, all that stuff starts to go into your energetic field and begins to play that story over and over again. So I'm going to move to Rhea, and then we'll come back to, because I do want to ask you, what are some of the things that you do with your own kids? Because I know you teach them what you've been learning throughout these years as you brought yourself back to health. So Rhea, tell us about your story of unmasking and your journey and how you got to where you are today, and any masks that stand out for you.
Yeah, thanks, Anamani. And I have to say, I was actually really excited for this conversation, because a part of my journey, a good part of my journey, was wearing various masks. And the one thing that stands out to me is just constantly having to pretend. And when we moved from the Philippines, I was born in the Philippines, we moved here and we migrated here in 1987. And my parents, being the ambitious parents that they are, they really wanted to give us a bright future and to ensure that we had, a beautiful home to live in, and we were, raised in a comfortable environment and things like that. And so part of what came with that was us moving often. We moved, It seemed like every couple of years back then. So we literally moved in from our basement apartment to a high-rise apartment, townhouse, and so on. Well, back then you didn't have things like Facebook and Instagram. And so keeping in touch with friends wasn't so easy. And so just when I was able to make friends with someone in elementary school, we would have to get up and move again. And so how that translated growing up was because of, I guess, the lack of positive influence in my life in terms of mentors and whatnot. It really translated into me putting on my project hat of wanting to fix you if you came into my world. And so what that translated to later on was some relationships that may have not necessarily been in alignment with myself, including relationships that were also abusive, and some friendships that were not necessarily the best for my overall well-being. Now, fast forward over to my working career, I got into the corporate world quite early, right after high school. And I did things kind of backwards when it came to academics. I didn't go to school right after high school. I actually worked my way up through the company and did my academics that way. Now, because I came into it so young, at 19 years old, going into the corporate world, I had no choice but to follow the people around me at that time. And in that environment, it's such a masculine heavy environment. And so a lot of the people that I looked to for influence and for advice were not necessarily in alignment with me. However, I thought that they were, leading the right way. So I did everything that I could to lead like them and be like them and talk like them and act like them. And I remember one of my biggest lessons, I should say, in leadership back then was I was leading a team. And for the listeners that have obviously gone through the corporate world, when we have our performance review, it was, I have to say, the most truthful and really I needed to hear that performance review. And it was just really a hard lesson for me to recognize that what I was being with my team was anything but myself and anything but being authentic. And so that disconnected my relationship with my team. And so that was a real lesson for me to learn, to say, hey, there's something that's not working here for you. You need to change things around. Mm-hmm. And so that was a pivotal point in my leadership career back then of how I chose to switch gears in terms of how I would be coaching my employees and my clients at that time. And so living that corporate life, I pretty much created for myself, this template life, this life of feeling like, okay, I checked off what I needed to check off on the list, the partner, the house, the job, everything. And as much as that was a beautiful life, there was something there that was not truthful to who I was. And ultimately, given the path that I was living, whether it was stemming from the journey that I went through as a teenager, upwards to the journey that I was going through as an adult, it was all just a pattern of pretending, trying to look accomplished, trying to be like someone else, pretending that I had it all taken care of, pretending that, I could handle it all and that, I didn't need any support, right? And it was all coming from a place of ego. It was very egoic. And ultimately, there's only so much pretending that you can do before your body and your universe shuts down. And so it actually took a huge shift in my life a few years ago, actually about 2013, where everything in my world shifted. Everything that was familiar for me was no longer. Got laid off from the job, walked away from the relationship, the house, got in a car accident, lost the car. But it was exactly what I needed to experience, because it was time for me to reset and just recognize that what I was doing was no longer working. I'm only 5'1", and I was nearly almost 187 pounds at that time. I was riddled with autoimmune diseases. I was diagnosed bipolar. I was diabetic type 2. Everything in my body was communicating to me that something's not working here. You need to change things. And so at that point, when the shift occurred in my life, it was really just a time for me to recognize that, hey, I knew that I could recreate the life that I had and was already living if I wanted to. But talking about the soul, the biggest calling at that time, and the clear message for me that was coming through for me was that it would be a disservice to my soul if I didn't see this through, if I didn't see, and connect back to who I truly am. And something had to shift, something had to stop. And so, when you're in a space where everything that you're familiar with is taken away and you're left with nothing, you have every opportunity to discover everything. And so since that shift, it was just a journey of really taking on what is this whole body, mind, spirit journey all about, and which has essentially led me to this journey of now sitting here in front of you and talking about it. So it's a bit of what I've gone through.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. And I want to go back to the point, because you both mentioned, I know I experienced this as well. The body does speak to us, and many times we ignore what the body's trying to tell us. For me, it was fainting spells. So I was in a unhealthy marriage, very verbally abusive. But on the outside, I was wearing a mask, right? People thought I was happy. I was pretending that I was happy, but inside I was a mess. And I remember a couple times when I was at work, I was still in the corporate world, and I was having lunch with a colleague, and I got really pale all of a sudden. And she goes, "Oh my God, are you okay? You look like you're going to faint." And I said, "Oh my God, yeah, I feel like I'm going to faint." And I went to the doctors, and they couldn't find anything. And it just represented, right, the stuff that was happening inside my body. I didn't know back then what I know now, but it was like my crown just was wanting to open up and connect, right, to this spiritual plane, that the mind, body, spirit that you speak of. But I was ignoring all of that. And it took me, I think, getting to a really bad place of really being concerned about my health, but then getting a jolt from the universe and having this dream that really was so lucid that it kind of shook me to the core. So did you guys experience some of that in your bodies? Signs that maybe you ignored? Something that I always like to tell people to be aware of, because your body does speak to you and we just tend to ignore it. So Jess, anything come to mind for you around that?
I've always, for years, I had IBS. Well, that's what the doctor called it, but yet she couldn't. She said there was no way to treat it. And, I would go back and say I always have this pain in the lower left part of my pelvic region, and she sent me for tests and nothing. So that would go in and out throughout the years. What's funny? Sometimes right now I'll have these things where I could just be sitting here, and then all of a sudden it feels like my brain just got like shook, like I just got rocked. And it's kind of scary that I've seen people from specialists, and they said, "Oh, it just might be stress," and I'm like, okay, but something says there might be something deeper there. And so that in the past I would say the IBS, but right now, if I was to pinpoint something, that's still there every now and then. Although I've had a couple of people say it's something called shifting. And Money, I don't know if you're familiar with shifting, no. But they say you're actually moving through dimensions. Something's happening in that moment where you're actually somewhere else, like you're actually shifting into another dimension. So I'm not sure, but that's my experience.
And I can relate to the IBS. You have the chakra pictures behind you, and IBS is related to the power center. And I remember I suffered from IBS as well. I think when I started my journey, every chakra was like totally imbalanced. And I had stuff with my knees, which is root chakra, and but I wasn't listening. And I'm bringing this up because I like to help people begin to pay attention. Like, what are you feeling in your body? Because it's always your body's trying to communicate something to you. Mm-hmm. And that's when the inner journey begins, right? Like, why is this showing up? right? Why do I have this illness? What is it trying to tell me? And when you start talking to it, it actually is going to start to communicate to you. So I wanted to bring that up to our audience because I know a lot of people don't pay attention to that. And for me, that was like, oh my God, the whole time my body was trying to tell me like, wake up, you know, it's like, and it took some deep pain for me to really start paying attention. How about for you, Rhea? Have you experienced anything with your body through your journey?
Yes, all of it. All of the above. Everything that you both ladies have mentioned. And yeah, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of autoimmune diseases throughout the course, especially before I shifted from my previous life. And a lot was, well, from a neurological standpoint, it was bipolar, and then, diabetes type 2, carpal tunnel. It's still something that I experience from time to time. And very recently, I actually posted something regarding alopecia that I'm experiencing. And it's something that I recall actually being in the shower. I think it was about two and a half years ago. And I remember that a big chunk of my hair fell out, but I didn't think anything about it. And I actually didn't discover it until about 2 months ago when I was at a salon, and it was the stylist that just pointed it out. And it really brought me back and connected me to how, again, our body communicates to us. And sometimes we don't discover things until years after.
Right.
And so, it's things that manifest in our bodies for a long period of time. And essentially by the time we actually experience it or take notice of it, that's already when our bodies are like, okay, something's got to give.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely. I totally resonate with that for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you did, Jessica, right? In that pivotal moment, what happened? Did somebody find you? Because I don't remember. Jessica's one of my co-authors in Pebbles in the Pond, and I know you wrote the story. I forgot what happened in that moment. Did somebody find you, or?
So yeah, so that evening he had attacked me in different ways, and it wasn't until, so rewinding when I was talking about me being on the sofa, he had choked me unconscious twice, and that's when I had my catalyst moment, my realization. But when I came to the second time, he had actually taken a really large kitchen knife, and he came over and he had stabbed me. And he was actually wearing a rosary at the time, and most people know that you don't wear rosaries, but his was all, decked out in diamonds and all that stuff. And so his snapped and it broke, and it never broke. He's had it for years, right? And so it broke at the moment, and he didn't tell me till after that. He said it wasn't until my rosary broke that's what snapped me out of my rage. And he was like, what the F am I doing? And so I keep that piece to this day, because I don't know if I'd be here if that piece didn't break at the moment it did.
Right.
And so that's what stopped it all. And he left the house. I thought he was actually going to go kill himself because I knew that there was a gun in the house, and he had left. And that's when I grabbed the kids. This must have been about 3 a.m. And my 3 kids, they were really young at the time. And I ran upstairs and I grabbed them, and I grabbed their blankets and as many toys as I could. And I put them in the SUV. And I was just like, something bad happened. Like, Mom's hurt. We have to go. And of course they're really young. And I remember just throwing them in the car and just leaping and just getting out of there. And so that's how I got out. But afterwards, for me, it was really through my healing journey. I was fortunate to be working for someone that had a huge property just north of Toronto, and I got to stay at one of his properties on his land. And I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where I didn't have to work for a couple of weeks. I would still have my bills paid. And I remember just looking outside and staring at the trees, because there was tons of greenery around, and the deer and the coyote and all that. I remember just saying, like, Jessica, what's going to make you happy? And that's really what set off my return to my spiritual journey and my spiritual growth, and really honoring myself. And I know you had asked earlier, like, what are things that I've taught my children? And I think the biggest thing for me is really honoring myself, being that example and being that role model for them, because they'll see me journal, they'll see me, doing appreciation, they'll see me do, and to me, that's the biggest thing, or honoring my time alone, honoring date nights with my husband, having fun, also like, doing business with Rhea, whatever it may be, they're seeing how I'm living. And I think that's the biggest thing that I could give them. For me as well, getting out, it was the realization and making the clear declaration that, so after I left, I knew there were things I wanted to do. I became a raw food chef. I went to New York City and I trained as a raw food chef, and I came back, opened a catering company here in Toronto. And I was just like, you know what? I love preparing food, but I feel like there's something bigger for me outside of the kitchen. And I didn't know what that was. I became a personal trainer. I was coaching women online virtually. People think that's funny. They're like, what do you mean? You just set up your camera and like people were doing weights? And I said, yeah. And I was down there like, okay, 5 more, 4 more. Like, you got paid to do this? You could be on a beach training. So I said, yeah. No. So that was great for me, because that's how I was supporting my kids, right? As a single mom, because I did that for 5.5 years, and I didn't have any financial support from their dad. Most of that, he was in jail, but I had to find a way to do things. And yet there was still something more. And I remember just sitting there one day going, you know what? I've done a lot of things in this lifetime. I've experienced a lot of things, whether you call them so-called bad or good, positive, negative, whatever it may be. I realized that I experienced a lot. And I thought, you know what? I'm pretty fulfilled. But then I said, Jess, if you were on your deathbed, what's one thing that's not fulfilled yet? And right away I was like, traveling the world and sharing my message at a bigger level. If I die and don't do that, that's what would eat me up. And, the guy that I worked for up at the big property north of Toronto, he was an older guy, and he would always tell me about things he would regret when he was younger, because he was in the show business. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to be like that. And I worked in the health, the hospitals and long-term care homes, and I would see old people and how they used to look and how they are now. And I'm like, wow, I am so not going to be like that. So all those thoughts were in my head of like, this is the time. And when I made that clear declaration, that's when the universe assembled all the right blocks into place, as it does. And that's when Rhea showed up.
Wonderful.
Well, she showed up already, but like the work that
So Rhea, how about you? Were there things that you started to do when in that moment where you knew that you needed to make some changes to get you back to that place of healing and more in alignment with who you are? What are some of the things that you started to do?
Yeah, sure. So thinking back, I'll go back to that year when that shift occurred. And because I didn't really take the opportunity to connect to myself, and I was doing so much for the sake of looking like someone else, I felt that it was really critical for me to honor that, to just get back to me. And so because at that time I was challenged with several things health-wise, I really felt in my gut that I was called to do something else. However, before I could even explore that, I needed to heal me first. And so what I chose to do was just make some huge lifestyle changes. And I think that I love the commonality that Jess and I have when it comes to health and nutrition, because that's essentially where I started to look first in terms of figuring out this whole, aside from obviously the spiritual and connecting back to that, but figuring out this whole spirit, body, mind work was really healing myself from the inside. And so I went to school for holistic nutrition, and actually before that, I got certified in culinary nutrition and then went to school for holistic nutrition, and really just did that, not so much for the sake of doing that work, but really again, to just heal myself and then to learn along the way as well. I explored and thought for a little while that maybe perhaps that's something that I'll do. But like Jess, I also felt called to something bigger. And I wasn't really sure and certain at that time what it was just yet. However, I knew that, you know what, if I'm just going to keep following my joy and keep following what lights me up, it'll lead the way and it'll manifest eventually. And so it's interesting because when I thought I said goodbye to coaching after I left the corporate world, I literally thought I said goodbye to it. And somehow, you know, when it comes to your purpose and what you're meant to do, sometimes it's not about finding it. It finds you, right? And so I somehow circled my way back to that while doing some things on the side. However, you know, it got really clear to me that, again, wanting to do something bigger. And then Jess and I were in conversation and talks. When was it, Jess? I think last summer. I think it was August, around there, about, you know, facilitating a workshop in Uganda. And I was just like, yeah, let's do this. And what's interesting was it was a girlfriend of mine that I used to work with in the corporate world that reminded me. And she said, you know, Rhea, do you remember the year that you left work? You said that I asked you, what are you going to do now? And you said, well, I don't know, maybe I'll do some work in Africa. And that was 5 years ago. And so I didn't really know what I was talking about back then, but evidently I've somehow manifested it. So here we are. So yeah, it's definitely been an interesting journey for sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So that's a great segue for you guys to talk about what you formed and what you're trying to do, what your vision is, what you've done so far. It's amazing work. So if you guys just, do you want to start, or whoever wants to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
You want me to take this, Jess? Yeah. So, oh my gosh, where do we begin, right? So essentially, what began as an opportunity for us to facilitate a workshop in Kampala, Uganda, for a group of women that were impacted by domestic violence. It's something that was an opportunity was created for Jess to go ahead and do that. And she had asked me to partner with her. And I said, yes, let's do this. And so initially we were planning to do this workshop, and we're working with an organization there to put this all together. But there was still something that was missing. And one thing that Jess and I both agreed on is we didn't want to just go into a community, make an impact, and then leave and parachute in and out of a place. We wanted to provide sustainable support. And we were really trying to figure out, how do we do that? And it just so happened that the organization that we were working with, something happened along the way, and unfortunately they no longer can continue as an organization. And for a split moment, we thought, oh man, so what's going to happen now to this opportunity? Now it can't go on. But that was just for a split second, because essentially that was the light bulb moment for us, where we thought, hey, why not instead support the leaders that are already there that still want to create this impact? Because there are leaders there that we're still very much looking forward to this workshop. And so when we really switched our perspective to that, it just made complete sense for us to expand their leadership and to support them. And it was such a win-win for us, because for them, they already have that relationship with the community. So the language barrier there, that's already taken care of. And they're already passionate about the work that they want to do and create the impact there. And so by us empowering them, they will then be able to go ahead and execute and create an even more powerful workshop with our support as a unit, as a team. In addition to that, when that mission is complete and the workshop's executed, they can then continue on creating even more of an impact moving forward in their community and beyond, and whatever else they want to do. So this just made complete sense for us. And so essentially that work that was initially started to be, or initially we thought we were going to create a nonprofit our organization. It became very clear for Jess and I that we're actually not going to go the nonprofit route. And really the reason behind that is, yes, there is some powerful nonprofit work being executed out there. However, we're so committed to this work that we really wanted to ensure that we're empowered enough to be able to execute these mission trips anytime. And so what we've actually created instead is a social enterprise. So our social enterprise is Syndicate International Group. And essentially our division, which is our nonprofit division, is a syndicate mission. And so to date, we are currently working with a group of 9 syndicate leaders in Kampala, Uganda, and we're literally on calls with them bi-weekly, where we are going through train the trainer calls with them for a couple of hours at a time. We're going through mindset principles, we're going through skill set principles, and we're creating a powerful workshop. And that's really the intention, so that we're supporting them virtually prior to us going there. And then when we go there in July, we'll be meeting them and connecting with them for the first time, which we're super excited about. And we'll be there to support them in the workshop that they're going to execute and lead. And then at that point, we'll then encourage them and invite them to think about what now, what else can we do for the community and beyond. And so our intention is to take exactly what we're doing in Kampala, Uganda, and replicate that exact same work in other communities, in developing communities around the globe. So we've already started forming relationships with Oaxaca, Mexico, and we are likely going to be doing that mission trip in January of 2019. And so, yeah, we're excited. You know, this thing has really just transformed into something that lights us up every time. And so actually going back to what we're creating as well, in addition to the nonprofit, again, and going back to the fact that we are starting what we're creating is a social enterprise, we're also creating a revenue generating piece of the company. And the intention with that is to ensure that any portion of those profits goes to fund the mission. And so that's something that Jess and I will be launching in the next couple of months. But essentially that is the umbrella of what we're creating. So it's actually the actual work in expanding leadership. It's doing the nonprofit, which is the pro bono work that we're doing in other communities. And then we're also looking to share the story of other leaders as well through something that we're going to be launching as well in terms of an interview platform, where we're going to be sharing the stories of powerful leaders around the globe. So just a lot of moving parts, but we're very, very clear that we're going to definitely execute. And yeah, so that's the work that we're doing.
Explain the social enterprise piece for people who may not have heard that term or.
Yeah, certainly. So it's, for us, what we're really, we got clear on is that when we created the syndicate mission, and before we even created the social enterprise, we started with our why first. We started with what is the work that we're doing that really connects to us and really is what's meaningful to us. It's beyond bottom line. It's beyond just, you know, here's a service and a product and we think it's fantastic, here you go, pay into it. This is the real work that we wanted to do. We wanted to create an impact. You know, Jess's story is so incredible, and my story is incredible, and everybody else's story is incredible in terms of the adversities that we've all gone through. And it's in those adversities that that's really the juice that we take to be able to do the work to create the impact moving forward. You know, Jess and I, and like very many people that are tuning into this right now, we're so fortunate that we have the opportunity to be able to develop ourselves by going to seminars and events and have mentors and coaches and whatnot. But not everybody in the world has access to that. However, the common ground that we all have is there are some great ideas and some amazing leaders in the world that are already and still creating an impact that can still create even more of an impact if they just have that support. And so that's essentially what drives us to do this work with the Syndicate mission. And so from there, as far as to circle back to your question in terms of the social enterprise piece, it's really, we're considering ourselves a startup, right? We are a business. However, a portion of that goes towards funding our mission and the social cause.
That's beautiful. And so I'm a big believer of putting your desires and your visions out into the universe. What plans do you have for this organization? What do you want to see happen? And what kind of help do you need? You know, what are you trying to form, and how can people help you?
Jess, you want to take that?
First, I was just going to piggyback on what Rhea was just saying earlier, just in the power, like we really believe in the power of leadership. You know, there's that saying about teaching a man to fish. Now, I don't know the exact verbatim right now off the top of my head, but if we can put the power into the hands of the people, they can make a huge impact, right? And the power of collaboration. And Rhea, you had just mentioned something about leadership, right? Like we have access to this. I was on my honeymoon in November, new husband, and Yeah, we were in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I remember being on the beach, and it was rural Mexico, and we hired a taxi driver to bring us through the different towns. And there was this one young girl on the beach, and she was carrying the thing over her head. It's very common to see, but she was really young, and it just hit me. And even going back, towards the town, going back to where we were staying, you would see dilapidated houses and all that. And I was like, wow, like leadership is our responsibility. Those of us that are in first world countries, that have access to it, a lot of people, it's easy to hide out and shrink and put those masks on and, shrink in fear and live small. But yet we have so much at our fingertips to elevate humanity and do something so good in this world. So that I just want to put that out there. But leadership is our responsibility. And as far as where we want to take this, as Rhea was saying, we are looking to expand, and right now we're seeing the transformation in our Ugandan leaders, and then moving to Mexico. And I think the coolest thing about Rhea and I's creating what we're creating with the Syndicate Mission and Syndicate International Group is that we're letting our souls guide us. We are very much in tune with, if there was only a camera sometimes when you see Rhea and I work, because sometimes things come up and we're like, okay, here's what's coming up for me. Okay, I'm feeling this. Like we're very in tune with what's happening, and we're listening to our inner voices. Whereas before, I know for me, that's not how I would operate. So if something doesn't feel right, or if something's not in integrity, or, I can't quite put my finger on that, we revisit that to make sure that it feels right before we move forward. And I think that's part of the magic in what we're creating, and why things have expanded so great since we've started in the short time that we've started.
I love that. So it's like being in your divine flow, I call it, right? Of really tuning in and checking in with all the things that you're doing and making sure it's in alignment with where your souls are trying to take you. And I think it is a new way of doing business. I do that too. And I'm so glad to hear that you guys are doing that together, of really tuning in and aligning with your souls and creating something that already feels magnificent, and I know is
this is what it feels like when the masks are off.
Yes. Absolutely.
Really just, you're authentic and you step in and you surrender, which for many of us is the hardest part, surrendering to who we really are.
Yeah.
But when you take it off, the magic happens, right? It just you start to see the serendipity happening, meeting the right people, and, all the stuff. So is there anything you'd like to tell the audience on either how to reach you, or about your programs, or anything that you need with what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so given our work our work is with leaders who overcome adversity and who are now called to make an impact in the world, we invite you to join us in two ways. So there's share our mission and help us share the work of other leaders called to influence the world. And this can be via interviews, events, or stages we can speak at. And we're open to all international opportunities. And then also to connect us with influential leaders such as professional athletes, retired police officers / ex-military, or even entrepreneurs who are already making a difference to be interviewed on our show.
Yeah, we're also launching a mastermind community for leaders called to influence the world in a big way. And so what we mentioned earlier in terms of what we're creating, we're going to be launching a membership program in the next couple months, I would say. And what we're offering is a complimentary 1-month membership to the first 33 people that contact us via private message on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/SyndicateIG. with their email address. And so what our platform will include is a mastermind community of leaders, exclusive access to interviews that we're going to be having with influential leaders, and then monthly lessons to expand your leadership. And so as far as where you can find us on Instagram at the Syndicate Mission, or on Facebook. We currently have 2 pages. One is our social enterprise page, which is facebook.com/SyndicateIG. and facebook.com, The Syndicate Mission. And that's for our pro bono. So again, the first 33 people that email us with their email address will have 1 month complimentary access to our membership platform.
Thank you. That's very generous. And I'll make sure to put the info underneath the video once we're done here. Any last words for our audience? Any advice? Anything you'd like to say before we close the show?
Live your truth.
Yeah. And really just go all in for yourself. And it's when we go in all in for ourselves is when we can go all in for the world, right?
I love that. And I echo that of really living your purpose. And I want to remind people that when you start to listen, it does find you. You know, we just have to take those masks off. And I am so grateful that you ladies joined us to tell us your story.
Thank you for having us.
This important work that you're doing. And just reminding everyone that you are loved and you are loved. And you can join me again next Monday. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Anamani.
Bye. Have a blessed
Bye. You too.